पद्मपत्रविशालाक्षी पद्मकेसरवर्णिनी नित्यं पद्मालयां देवी सा मां पातु सरस्वती भगवती निःशेषजाड्यापहा।
Hello, good evening, everyone. Welcome to IACI academic meeting. Today's topic is about parametric mapping. And as we had circulated a Google Sheet, I would just like to share the results. So as you can see that most of the people who submitted the Google form and who are attending this meeting, the hindrance to use CMR parametric mapping was because they do not have the right knowledge. We will try to do our best. We have the senior faculty members from our organization who would be helping us with that. Few people also did not have the processing software. There are some free online softwares. We have some few company peoples also who are joining this, who probably can help us with the scanner or the processing software, so that as an organization, as a community, probably we can start using this and apply in our clinical practice. The reason why many of us could not use the CMR parametric mapping, one of the reason was that maybe the cost or the cardiac work was not there. So the message probably as a community we would like to share that once we start doing it and upgrading it ourselves, probably even the work will increase, and the probably we will get more company support as well, and to get all these sequences for trial license so that we can use it in our clinical practice. So in case if there were people who were using CMR parametric mapping, the main challenge was to obtain normal range. So our senior members will share their experience and how they have used it in their clinical practice. About the artifacts and variable values, those questions also we will try and answer. So without further ado, I would like to begin with our first talk. Dr. Vijay Bhaskar Noori sir will be sharing his talk about the basics of CMR parametric mapping. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Priya. Thank you all. Am I audible and visible, please?
Yes.
So, I welcome you all from IACI, on behalf of IACI, for this academic program on CMR in parametric mapping. I thank Priya and everyone in IACI for giving me an opportunity to share some of my ideas and experiences on parametric mapping. My first slide here has taken these images from the internet, from a very good article. A lot of articles on parametric mapping. And this is a self-explanatory slide, which shows that there is a still image here. There is a LG image here. It is a T2 map, native T1 map, post-contrast T1 map, and ECV map. This is everything about the parametric mapping. And what is not seen on XR image or LG image, you can see the parametric mapping. Number one, parametric mapping is going to help us showing the pathology in a color pixelated presentation. These color maps itself are the demonstration of pathology and or normalcy, let's put otherwise. So this is what is the parametric mapping about, is showing the inherent properties of the myocardium, is T1 and T2 relaxation in a pixelated form. Each pixel contains the relaxometry value, the T1 or T2 of the myocardium, that particular voxel. That is known as parametric mapping. Now, I will next 30 minutes or so, I'll go through in this fashion about need for quantification, basic physics, acquisition parameters, post-processing, technique, modifications, calculation of normal ranges. I'll spend more time on that. Post-processing, how to avoid artifacts, how to check for artifacts, presentation of data, SCMR guidelines, interpretation, report generation, and so on and so forth. I try to be as fast as possible, but skip unnecessary data. So the mapping is mainly T1 mapping, T2 mapping, T2 star mapping. T1 mapping contains T1 native, T1 post contrast, and extracellular volume fraction calculation. Now, how is parametric mapping different from regular MRI sequences? The regular MRI sequences, like spin echo sequence or inversion recovery sequence or gradient echo sequence, depend mainly upon signal intensity values, and based upon the signal intensity, normal versus abnormal, to say this is an abnormal signal intensity compared to a normal signal intensity. You compare normal to or deemed to be normal to abnormal signal intensity. That's a crude way of putting the signal intensity values. You cannot quantify nor give an accurate abnormality or the quantification of the abnormality. As in T1 mapping or T2 mapping, what is happening is the T1 relaxometry and the T2 relaxometry. In the physics, I'll come to the physics in the next couple of slides. But the T1 relaxometry and T2 relaxometry are the basic fundamental magnetic principles of the proton. So when this proton is put in an external magnetic field, given a pulse, given an external pulse, it tries to come back to its equilibrium state. Normally, all the protons align themselves in one direction and they are subjected to magnetic field of the MRI. They are put in the MRI magnet. Once a pulse is given, inversion pulse is given, they are disturbed. They are disturbed. They flip from their normal position to another position. Then you stop the pulse. Then they come back to their normal position, that is equilibrium position. During coming back during equilibrium position, they emit some energy to the nearby surrounding matrix. So T1 mapping, we call this as spin lattice relaxation. That means the proton, during its spinning and coming back to equilibrium, release some energy, and then this energy is calculated based upon the acquisitions what we take, and that is known as relaxometry or T1 relaxometry. In T2, the decay occurs. Here, relaxometry, the curve is at the relaxometry curve. In T2 mapping, it is a decay of the T2. Decay of the T2, that means it loses its energy and then comes back to the equilibrium state. T2, it's known as decay. When it is known as the T1 curve and T1 map values. So inherent proton in the voxel will, healthy or abnormal, will behave based upon its healthy or abnormality in a different way. So this T1 relaxometry or relaxation values are the ones which are calculated after giving an inversion pulse in an inversion recovery sequence, and that is represented pixel by pixel pattern. That means a voxel, if you take 2 or 3 pixels or 1 pixel, that pixel contains a number, means 1000, 1020, 900, 950. That is the relaxation, T1 relaxation value of that particular pixel in that of the myocardium in that particular pixel. So those values are given as color maps. The difference between normal Pineco sequence, relaxometry sequence is that in relaxometry sequence, the signal, the energy given when the protons are coming back into the equilibrium is taken as milliseconds. These milliseconds are demonstrated in a color pixel format as a representation map or PP1 map. That's the difference. Now, so wherever you draw an ROI, it gives us the one relaxometry value, one map value of that particular myocardial pixel. So this is what is about mapping of T1, T2, or T2 star. Why? What is it important? Why is it important? Importance is now relaxometry. We don't have numbers. We don't have numbers like 900, 950, 1000, 1050, 1100. We don't have numbers. What is the advantage of having numbers? The advantage of having numbers is you can quantify, you can prognosticate, you can look at longitudinal follow. Patient comes to you with an edema, have T1 and T2 map high values, 3 months follow-up study, typically COVID infection, 3 months follow-up study, T1, T2 map values have come down to normal. This quantification. So you have a number there, you can quantify there. Unlike these Pineco sequences, you can't quantify. These are quantification maps. And that is the importance of doing the T1 and T2 relaxometry. For an example, I'll tell you. Last couple of days, I had 3 cases. All of them had some kind of acute kidney injury, and also had reduced ejection fraction 35%, 33%. They wanted to rule out intrinsic myocardial disease, some kind of a myocardial infiltrate disorder as a cause for their non-hypertensive, non-diabetic. So I can't give contrast. Then I told them that I'll use the T1 mapping technique and T2 mapping technique, and reasonably I can give you without giving contrast that there is filtration, inflammation, edema, fibrosis. All 4 I can tell you without giving contrast, but doing a T1 and T2 mapping technique. That is the beauty of doing T1 and T2 map technique. There you can pick up inflammation by T1 and T2 map, filtration by T1, edema by again T1 and T2 maps, fibrosis by T1 map. This quantification. Now coming to difference between ischemic and non-ischemic causes. Slide what you are seeing, those 2 causes, ischemia, non-ischemia. Ischemia is focal, you have late gadolinium enhancement, you have the difference you see between nulled myocardium and enhanced myocardium. That's on your left side. On your left side, you've got diffuse disease where there is some enhancement in the septum. Can you quantify the enhancement? Can you call it as LGE? What kind of LGE it is? Number 1. Number 2, in this myocardium, I am seeing LGE only in the septum. How sure I am there is no abnormality in the rest of the myocardium? So that is the diffuse disease, which is seen here in the line diagram. Diffuse disease. Diffuse disease can manifest as faint LGE or no LGE. When there is no LGE, how am I going to diagnose diffuse disease, quantify diffuse disease? Then comes the T1 mapping, the beauty of T1 mapping. Just to go back to the anatomy and pathophysiology, myocardium is made up of 75% myocytes, 25% interstitium. 25% interstitium contains fibroblasts, endothelial cells, coronary arteries, and of collagen. So, in the myocardium, there is continuous synthesis and degradation of collagen happening. It's a dynamic process. So, this is known as interstitium, and myocytes from the ciliary compartment. The interstitium contains blood vessels. Again, I'll tell you blood vessels, fibroblasts, coronary arteries containing the blood, and the matrix and the loose matrix. This is the collagen. So this collagen is responsible for normal deposition of collagen, is responsible for fibrosis. And whenever there is an imbalance between degradation or synthesis of collagen, there is fibrosis. And this fibrosis can occur because of leukemia, infarction, or insults, or infection, inflammation, and infiltration. So this extracellular matrix is what is now forming the basis for fibrosis, and fibrosis is the one which is responsible for many of the diseases which are being now taken as the what you call heart failure with rejection fraction. Heart failure with rejection fraction. This is where we have got diffuse infiltrative disorders, diffuse fibrosis in the interstitium, and that is what T1 mapping is going to look at and diagnose, identify, prognosticate. Just for your information, we have two kinds of fibrosis. There is replacement, there is reactive or interstitial fibrosis. Replacement fibrosis occur typically there is myocyte death because of infarction. You can see here the number of myocytes, these oval things, the myocytes here are very less, and the large matrix, large extracellular matrix is known as ECM or interstitium, as in reactive fibrosis, interstitial fibrosis. The number of myocytes are not reduced, they are there. So the amount of interstitium relatively is widened in the presence of normal myocytes. And when you give contrast, there's a large amount of gadolinium contrast accumulation in the replacement fibrosis, giving you an LGE, proper white or dead myocardium. Whereas in reactive or interstitial fibrosis, you don't get so much of enhancement because there's not much of the widened interstitial space, number one. And number two, there's not much space available for the gadolinium compound to go and occupy. So there is the little enhancement, faint enhancement, no enhancement. When there is no enhancement, little or faint enhancement, you can miss when you do late gadolinium enhancement study for this reason. That is why, in addition to late gadolinium enhancement study, we've got these mapping techniques which are going to pick up this extracellular volume or matrix expansion because of this pathology and then give us map. What is map? The map can get what is there in the myocyte, what is there outside the myocyte. That means in the extracellular matrix. This is where T1 mapping and what is known as extracellular volume calculation, extracellular volume calculation, the extracellular matrix volume calculation can be done. Diagnose the interstitial disease, diffuse interstitial disease of the myocardium. Now, what is myocardial fibrosis? What is doing? Diffuse reactive fibrosis can lead to diastolic dysfunction, heart failure, and sudden cardiac death. And these people have a prolonged prodrome. I mean, they don't present on day one. They've got a lot of subclinical period before which develop into a chronic stage. So, for example, if you take hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, if you take chronic hypertensive heart disease, you take aortic stenosis, you take mitral regurgitation, you take chronic diabetics, you take CKD, amyloidosis, sarcoidosis, all these conditions have long prodromic stage before they develop into a heart failure, so dysfunction, of obviously sudden cardiac death. So these are the individuals where when T1 mapping and ECV fraction calculation are done, you can pick up disease early on, initiate treatment, probably help them in preventing the mortality and morbidity. That is the value of the. So I have told you the pathophysiology of LGE, fibrosis, and what is the need for parametric mapping is drawbacks of LGE, which I have already told you. Coming back to what is meant by parametric mapping. What is parametric? What is metric? Parametric mapping is, metric is measurement, any form of measurement. Metric is measurement. So parametric, what you are doing, mapping, what you are doing is you are measuring T1 map values or T2 map values and comparing it with already measured, established normal ranges available. That is what is meant by parametric. Metric is measurement, parametric, and already measured values are there. Comparing them, measured values is known as parametric mapping. Where 1000 normal, I've got 900 normal. If there is 1200, that is abnormal. That is what is meant by parametric mapping. So in T1 mapping, there are what is known as native, contrast, and extracellular volume fraction calculation. Native is without contrast. Contrast, after you give gadolinium, again measure, then ECV fraction. What happens to regular, when I told you spinlet relaxation, I already told you. One important point you should remember is that the T1 map curve, T1 map values are a tissue signature, because myocardium, normal myocardium, in terms of myocardial disease, behave their own specific pattern and they give T1 relaxation. So T1 maps form a tissue signature of the myocardium in health and pathology. And that is what we're going to look at. In detail. Now, T1 map values vary depending upon the surrounding structure of the myocardium. What is happening in the surrounding structure and environmental changes. For example, size of the molecule. If I have to put it, I will say T1 relaxation depends upon total solid, total liquid, semi-solid, semi-liquid, between mixture of solid and liquid. So depending upon the molecule size, shape, viscosity, temperature, strength of the magnetic field, T1 relaxivity varies. So that is what we have to keep in mind, and then go about the T1 mapping values. This is a physics diagram showing you the what is known as longitudinal relaxation or longitudinal magnetic relaxation. What is the advantage of one? ECV fraction. And why do you do post contrast? So the native T1 map values will give abnormality about the intracellular or extracellular component. Like I told you already, in the myocardium, there are myocytes and there is a matrix. Outside, extracellular matrix. The extracellular matrix contains blood vessels, fibroblasts, loose cellular tissue, and the other collagen which is regularly forming and degrading. So the T1 native map values will give only about the myocytes, intracellular component, and the extracellular component. It could be edema, infarction, anything else. Whereas the extracellular volume calculation will dichotomize the myocardium, cellular, extracellular component. This extracellular component of the matrix is one which is more into study now, because the reactive fibrosis occurs predominantly in that particular matrix. And if you study that particular matrix by doing the extracellular volume, what is extracellular volume? What is outside the cells? Is extracellular volume or matrix. Study that matrix, then you are going to know the pathology, pathogenesis, pathophysiology of all the diffuse infiltrative diseases or inflammation or storage disorders, which can cause expansion of the extracellular matrix and disease, abnormality, prognostication, severity of the disease also can be made out by calculating the extracellular matrix. So how to do it? I'll come back in the next couple of slides. So now, how to do a T1 mapping sequence? Basic physics. You forget about spin echo. Think about the inversion recovery sequence, where even before you start acquisition, there is what is known as T1 magnetization preparation pulse. Inversion pulse is given. All the protons go into a completely opposite direction. Stop. Then start acquiring the data. So depending upon the healthy, unhealthy parameters in the proton, they start relaxing. They start coming back to their equilibrium phase, in which they emit energy that is calculated, and that is what is plotted as the models, various physics behind it, and ultimately you get what is known as a T1 map. And this T1 map projected as a color map, a black and white map, also as a curve fitting map. I'll show you. So what is the best form of relaxivity assessment? Is one spin echo without any adulteration, normal spin echo. It cannot be done because lot of breath holds, lot of movement artifact, like motion artifact cannot be done. So what you are going to do? Will do faster acquisition. You have to get the result very fast. You have to get the information from the relaxivity very fast. What you are going to do? Either you are going to give number of pulses, more number of pulses, or reduce the flip angle. You reduce the flip angle, deviates, comes back, deviates, comes back. So you reduce the flip angle. More number of pulses, more number of inversion pulses, or acquire more number of times. Do modification. So routine spin echo sequence, inversion recovery sequence, what is done now. Here, so waiting after giving a 90-degree pulse, initially you give 90-degree pulse. The protons are deflected. Stop. They start coming back. Again, give 1 or 2 more pulses. Again, they are reflected. Come back. So like that, they give multiple pulses. Start reading the signals coming from the protons. You get a faster curve. Is what is known as Look-Locker sequence. The Look-Locker sequence has been named after the great physicians, physicists who are Dr. Locker, who in 1970 have identified a non-human environment, NMR experiments. They identified that instead of doing regular T1 study, if you can start inversion recovery to multiple pulses, low flip angles, you can start getting the information very fast, and shortens the period and gives you the data. That formed the basis for Look-Locker sequence and inversion recovery sequence and T1 mapping sequence also. This Look-Locker sequence is the one which is used as an IR scout. It has got multiple TI values. It is a prospective gated study. It's a GRE study, and then it takes long time. Lot of movement artifacts from cardiac motion, acquires cycles in multiple cardiac cycles. So based upon that, quantify segment LV epicardium, myocardium is very difficult. Lot of artifacts. So sequence has been modified from what is known as a modified Look-Locker inversion recovery sequence. Modified Look-Locker inversion recovery (MOLI). Modified Look-Locker inversion sequence. That was done. That was promoted in 1990. And after preparing this sequence, Dr. Locker received emails from the people who have modified their sequence, stating that we have named this sequence after you, known as a modified Look-Locker sequence, and hereafter it is called as a modified Look-Locker sequence because they've used this technique of Look-Locker technique, multiple RF pulses, inversion recovery, position fast as the basis and modified this. This modified Look-Locker sequence or MOLI sequence is one where to try to weed out the difficulties in the Look-Locker sequence. Number one, they acquired in a single cardiac phase, diastole or systole, so that don't have multiple cardiac phases. Registration will occur only in diastole or systole. Number one. Number two, is a one preparatory pulse, you multiple 2 or 3 pulses, and 2 or 3 Look-Locker experiments we call it as Look-Locker experiments, so that repeatedly you get to invert the pulse and get back the images. Number 3, modified Look-Locker sequence. This particular motion correction sequence known as non-rigid registration of the data. So once all these things are used, one cardiac cycle, one phase of cardiac cycle, diastole or systole, multiple Look-Locker experiments, non-rigid registration, motion correction, or heartbeat, the background, you get these maps known as MOLI maps, and also a curve known as the fitting of the recovery, the T1 recovery, what you get. That is known as a MOLI sequence. It's a modification of the Look-Locker sequence, 1990, and MOLI sequence is the one which is most often used. Now, such MOLI or shortened MOLI is used for higher heart rates. It's only modification of the MOLI sequence. So there are also other sequence known as SASHA sequence, saturation sequence. That is not very commonly used, but MOLI sequence is one which is very commonly used. I've already told you about MOLI sequence, and these are typical diagram of MOLI sequence where you give first inversion pulse, acquire 5 images, second inversion pulse, acquire 5 images, and in between 3 heartbeats, there is a gap because you give inversion pulse, short T1, long T1. Long T1 recovery, you have to give some time for those fluid signals having long T1 recovery come and get the signal. That is why give a 3 heartbeat gap for recovery, acquire more TI with offset inversion recovery, offset pulses required. So today you are acquiring about 8 images. These are the maps. You can get the raw data. Raw data. These numbers here are not, see, one is T11, there is T16, there is T12. They are arranged depending upon their laxivity or their T1 value. It is not first should come first, second should come second, or third come third. It is depending upon the value of the value, intrinsic value, normal or abnormal. They are fitted in this curve. This is the curve which is drawn here. That is known as the fitting curve. Then post-processing, a lot of post-processing takes place. You get the ultimate data. So initially when modified look-locker sequence, Molly sequence was used, they started using 3 the gap, causing gap here. So this sequence followed to this because they are not giving enough time for the first sequences, first the images come back. There's not enough time for the recovery of the first saturated first inversion recovery sequence. That is why latest sequence what is used is known as 5-3-3. Remember, known as naming sequence. What is 5-3-3? Give an inversion pulse, first inversion pulse. Take 5 data sets of images of varying recovery. Give 3 heartbeats gap. So 5 heartbeats are getting 5 images of one recovery. Then give 3 heartbeat gap. The gap is to allow longer one relaxation to occur in this 3 heartbeat gap. Then you give second inversion pulse, 3 more heartbeats. Pulses from 3 more heartbeats. So this is a 8 heartbeat sequence commonly used now for native T1 mapping, and this total number of heartbeats are 5 plus 3 plus 3, 7. Is the gap. Now for post contrast, there is no need for you to wait for longer time, because once you give contrast, gadolinium compound goes and sits in the extracellular matrix, says, come on, both of us will run fast. What it does, the gadolinium compound sits in the myocardium, there it goes, extracellular matrix, and protons are slowly coming back to the equilibrium phase. This gadolinium creates its own magnetic field inside. So once it creates its own magnetic field inside, causes lot of turbulence. Then the dephasing protons faster will move fast, come back to equilibrium very fast. So this influence of the magnetic field created by the gadolinium compound in the myocardium. So T1 laxivity is faster, means the recovery is faster. When the recovery is faster, no need for you to wait for 11 or 12 seconds. You can give a pulse, require 4 beats, 1 gap, then again take 3, one heartbeat gap, again 2. Because going faster. Because the T1 relaxivity is made faster. Shortening of T1 relaxivity by giving the gadolinium compound, which creates its own magnetic field, internal magnetic field within the myocardium, make the protons run faster towards equilibrium. Now, shortened Molly is version where we have only 9 heartbeats, 5, 1 gap, again 1, then 1 heartbeat gap for recovery, and then 1. The shortened Molly is used whenever there is a high heart rate, more than 90 heart rates, that use shortened Molly. That is what is the thing. So the facts are, after you acquire a Molly sequence, you get T1 maps, and then the T1 value, like I told you, varies with temperature, varies with magnetic field, varies with size, molecule, viscosity, male, female, so many other things. Variations are there. We'll not go into all those confusing things. We come to a standard and a healthy and reproducible way of mapping. We do it. So variations can occur. Not go into all these details now. Then post-contrast T1 map, post-contrast values are low because obviously T1 laxivity is occurring faster. Shortening of T1 effect. That, for example, 950 to 1000 is a native value on 1.5. it is 400 to 500 or 500 to 550 on a 0.5 Tesla. 200 to 1250 or normal on example 3 Tesla. It is about 600 to 650 post contrast because of the shortening of the T1 map. That's what we're looking at. These are taken from the one of the major articles. What are the variations? You can see number one, variations occur from septum to the lateral wall. It's okay. They are not a major variation. Not a major variation. Then post contrast 460, contrast 1189. Be clear. Then there's a native T1 map, post contrast T1 map. Subtract from both these with some calculations, get extracellular volume matrix. I'll tell you in detail about the basis for extracellular volume matrix calculation. I'll tell you in a couple of slides. How do you acquire? How do you acquire? It's very important for all of us. Usually, all the acquisitions take place in diastole, mid to end diastole, because less movement occurs at that time. Number one. Now, when you acquire in systole, there are arrhythmias, there are high heart rate variations. Try to acquire in systole. All of you know, the diastole, the phase is less. The diastolic phase in high heart rates is very less compared to systole. Number one. But two, because of the high heart rate variation, motion artifacts, myocardium is already thin in diastole. So, a lot of artifacts going from epicardium to the endocardium. This way, if you acquire in systole, you got a thicker myocardium, high heart rate variation stage, so that you are acquiring more in the myocardium and in the epicardium and the endocardium. This way, because of the mapping advantage and also the drawing of ROI advantage, it's better to acquire in systole, high heart rate variation, and in arrhythmias than in the. You can always modify. You talk to your site engineer, talk to your application specialist, he'll tell you how to acquire systole and diastole. Now, short axis, long axis. Here are the pathology is. For example, the diffuse pathology. Diffuse pathology, short axis, 3 short axis slices, apical, mid, basal 1/3 is enough. Apical HCM, for example, during the apical HCM, you want to know what is the T1 map value for prognostication of ECU fraction there. Acquiring long axis view also. Nothing wrong. Basically, standard norm is slices, apical, mid, basal 1/3 for diffuse disease, and focal disease also, for focal lesions also can acquire. You already know it is sarcoidosis, amyloidosis. I want to rule out diffuse infiltrative disease. Mid 1/3 slice, mid section, mid 1/3 short axis slice also is enough. Calculate the myocardium, mid myocardium. It's a thick myocardium. Okay, no problem. But once you acquire, I've told you Molly, told you how to acquire diastole, threshold, single breath hold sequence. Again, the Molly sequence is single breath hold sequence. So, a single breath hold, once you acquire, now look at the accuracy of the acquisition. That is very important. Now, accuracy acquisition is motion correction, ECG triggering, heart rate variation, proper breath holding. All these things have to be done by looking at the source images of the raw data. So, the face value, I got a black and white image here of the one map. I got a color map here. Do not jump, draw an ROI, because without doing a proper analysis of the raw data, motion correction, breathing motion, heart rate variation, you are going to put your finger somewhere else. So the best thing to be done is to don't jump, look at the raw data. Now, look at this. Someone started calculation already. Already ROI has been drawn on the septum. Already epicardium, endocardial contour segmentation has been done. Look at this. Totally gone. So, raw data inspection is very important. But you, even before, draw the map, because this is the scene. But repeat it. Otherwise, they're going to give wrong values. Obviously, they're going to be wrong values. Look at this here. Here. Draw. How to check? How to check for validity? Simple. There, put a cursor, put an ROI on where you want to measure septum. From the cine, the raw data is not going into the endocardium, not going into RV, not going anywhere else. Fair enough. This is a good data. Yes. Check here. It's going into RV endocardium, going to LV endocardium, dancing all the way. So this has to be discarded. Repeat the study. The important is repeat the study. That is important. Number one. Number two, in the software, any of the software. This is a circle software. You go to Philips, Siemens. I think they definitely the software there. It is known as fitting curve. Fitting curve is all this data what you have got from the 8 images are fitted into a proper exponential curve, and this is the curve. And all the dots will be in the same curve, in the same line. This is normal, which is known as R2 curve or rate of relaxation curve. Rate of relaxivity is inversely proportional to the 1. So this is the curve. This is correct. As this curve, dots are going haywire. They're going into all directions. This is wrong. Don't use this curve. Read the study because your values are going to be wrong. Look at this. For example, here, my 1157 minus 49 is good. Standard deviation is 49 is good. R2 curve is 1000 is good. That is normal. Because here, my standard deviation is gone to 110 and 300. That means how many pixels are coming into it? It's not only myocardium. See, myocardium is 3 Tesla, 100, 1100, and 1.5, 950, 1000. So if everything is going beyond 3000, 300, means obviously the curve is the ROI is going into some other place. So if standard deviation is becoming more, should be careful. Again, repeat the study. Number one. Number two, when you draw the epicardium endocardial contours, you have to be perfect. You have to draw it properly because any of the epicardial contour goes into the epicardial fat, epicardial effusion, or lung parenchyma. Their global values are going for a toss. So for that, some softwares, Philips, what is there is a red line. You see this red line, center line. Red line is center line. So you draw the contour properly. The software automatically takes the red line center. It says, okay, I'm in the myocardium only, and that result is what you're going to get. This is not going to preclude you from motion artifacts. This is only avoid artifacts from the surrounding structures, not motion artifacts. Remember that. Direct cardiomyopathy. The thinned out myocardium. You got a big problem there. So this is where you draw your maps properly, get the correct quantification. Let us come back to basic physics of CV fraction. I already told you CV fraction. So this is a normal myocardium. The myocytes. This is the interstitium. That blue line interstitium contains all those I have told you already. There are some blood vessels and capillaries. This is the endocardial cavity with blood. It's got RBCs. Here, after giving contrast, the contrast is going into the blood pool, the endocardial cavity. Gadolinium also is going into the interstitial space. Here, interstitial space. Gadolinium is distributed in the blood pool, in the interstitial space, predominantly. Now, if you see here, fibrotic myocardium, there is widening of the interstitial space, not much of loss of the myocytes. As widening of the interstitial space, where gadolinium will going and accumulate. Post-contrast study, gadolinium accumulates there. Now, here in the blood pool, gadolinium accumulates in the blood, not in the RBC. Please, RBC intracellular compartment is spared because the contrast what we are giving is an extracellular contrast. So RBC into the RBC, it will not go. The contrast will not go. Remember this point. When we talk about calculation of the extracellular matrix, we'll come back to it. Now, how do you calculate the extracellular matrix or EC fraction? Simple. Signal from the myocardium, pre and post. Signal from the blood, because the contrast is there. Signal from the blood, and blood volume, blood pool, and post. You subtract it. The gadolinium contrast, which is there within the myocardium and the blood pool, the interstitium, that value comes out. Because extracellular contrast, you are separating the myocytes, separating the blood pool here. whatever is there in the interstitium of the myocardium is what you get. So that is by taking the post contrast signals. There's an equation based upon that equation. Simply subtracting whatever gadolinium contrast is going to the myocardium and the extracellular matrix, the blood pool. All this you will get. Why blood pool? Because there are already blood within the interstitium. The blood, there are capillaries from which blood is going. So that is removed to get the extracellular volume fraction. Now, when you are doing the extracellular volume ECV fraction, also submitting the hematocrit, you have to know the PCV. You have to know PCV and the hematocrit. Why you should know the hematocrit or PCV? That is because extracellular contrast, the gadolinium contrast, extracellular, will not go into the RBCs. They're already there in the blood pool. Means they're there in the blood pool, already there in the capillaries. The RBC, they're already in the capillaries. So that volume also you are going to calculate. When you calculate that volume, you equate it, adjust it with the CV fraction. You get the two extracellular volume fraction, which is there. It is the basis for diffuse fibrosis, vascular dysfunction, heart failure with preservation fraction, and sudden cardiac death. That extracellular volume fraction calculation is what is important. TMR and entire research is going that direction. I will not go into much detail. I already told you that normal anatomy, 70% of myocyte, 25% of extracellular volume. So blindly you can say 25% normal ECV fraction. Calculation, various methods, 6%. Not more than that. 1.5 to Tesla, maximum 25-26% values. Remember that. No need to go scratch your head for what is ECV fraction. 75, 25. 25 already is there. Nothing to worry about it. These are the maps you calculate. And the normal values, I told you 25. Various normative values are given. Not good. This is an important slide. An important slide. Clinical application of T1 mapping and ECV fraction. When you should do T1 mapping, you should do ECV fraction, and when both. So only native in edema, predominantly in edema, like acute ischemia, acute inflammation, only T1 mapping, only for ECV. Whereas in storage disorders, you have the advantage. You should do both native and post contrast, because I told you the pathophysiology of interstitial disease. I told you, so you have to do this amyloidosis, hemochromatosis, Anderson-Fabry. You have to do both native and post contrast ECV fraction. Now you can do away only with ECV post contrast in fibrosis, that is replacement fibrosis, interstitial fibrosis, caused by either cell death, myocyte death, and infiltration. Only ECV fraction is enough for you to diagnose fibrosis or quantify the fibrosis. Storage disease, need both. Plus edema, native, acute ischemia, inflammation. Native is more than enough. Now, these are the various conditions which cause no increase or decrease of native T1 maps and extracellular volume fraction. Various conditions. So ultimately, this particular slide or the next slide is going to tell us that if I get an increase in native T1 map value, 1.5, 1200, 1150, after doing a correct study, I don't know, it does not have amyloidosis, does not have sarcoidosis, does not have any other disease. He has come with some ectopics or some kind of IWMA. Then this particular patient, you don't know, might be having rheumatoid arthritis, ischemic sclerosis, hypertensive heart disease, anemia, cobalt toxicity, or anthracycline toxicity. So the point of discussion of these slides is that there are various conditions which cause increase in T1 map values native. Also, some of them cause increase the expansion of the intercellular matrix. So just by giving one T1 map value, I cannot say got fibrosis, go and take treatment. I cannot say that, because there are so many things. Stenosis, mitral devastation, site equal replacement, obesity, hypertensive heart disease, all of them can produce some kind of increase in T1 map values, significant increase in T1 map values. So this you got to remember, that not just fibrosis. There are other so many conditions it can produce, and the non-specific, and we need to discuss and evaluate these things later on. Now coming to the important aspect of how to create normal changes in your center. Very important. There are various methods. CMR says 50 healthy controls. Do it. Even before jumping into the normal, I'll tell you. For one, when you do the normal, when you fix a parameter Molly 533, it's only 533. 50, 533. For V 240, 40. Angle 35, 35 only. Similarly, PETR, same. Everything must be same. Crossing must be same. ROI, draw an ROI on the septum, must be 40 square millimeter, only 40 square millimeter. Want to draw a big one, everyone big one. So healthy volunteers, you take 50, same methodology, Molly, everyone same. Now, if you start using shortened Molly for some, other Molly for other, no, will not accept it. Will not accept it. Use 533, it has to be for everyone. Use 3335, same thing use for everyone. 511, same thing use for everyone. Don't change, because validation standardization goes for a toss. Number one. Number two, after getting your normal value, same method what you have followed for normal value have to be followed for your patients also for clinical diagnosis. Otherwise, you'll go wrong. Same value, same parameters have to be used. Similar standards have to be used. Same conditions have to be used. This is imperative, including ROI. Including the ROI. Very important. How do you do? There is one method, one interesting article in JCMR in 2019. Good article. It says, first take 20 healthy volunteers who come for non-cardiac ailment. 20 of them. Measure. Want global, want segmental, whatever you want. Now, other important point. In healthy volunteers, you're doing in diastole, everyone you're doing diastole. And in cases you do diastole. You're doing systole, everything is systole. Again, there's variation in the, but it's very important. Diastole means diastole. Systole is systole only. Don't change. Volunteers or normal subjects. So, it's 20 we have done. And then identify. In 20 we have identified. And take one external reference range. What is external reference range? Same, for example, I've got a 1.5 GE or a 3 Tesla Phillips. So 1.5 GE, same magnet, same FOV, same parameters, same flip angle, same Molly sequence. All of them same. Compare that particular external reference range. Lot are available in the internet. Compare. Then decide, okay, my level 940 to 960 or 940 to 980 is the normal range. It might be. In these 20 healthy subjects, if 20 are right, this start using your normal range. If 2 are abnormal, only 2 are abnormal, they are known as outliers. Take out the 2, take this 18, then do 20 more tests, do 20 more healthy volunteers. Then again check with the external reference. In the 20, second time 20, that means 36, second time 20. If 18 are in cohesion with the external reference range, adapt this and start doing it now. Yes, in this second time 20, if again there are discrepancies or a lot of discrepancy with the external reference range, then you have to do all over again, or if this 20 matches with your first 20, not with the external reference range, matches the first 20, means this 40 is your normal reference range, and use this normal reference range as your normal reference parameters. So always in normal reference ranges, you've got external validation, external reference range of the same conditions. In the same conditions, it is there. It is a very easy thing. Just follow it. Remember what I have told you. All conditions must be same. 20. If it is 2, it's okay. Again, if it is more than 3, are coming outside your normal range, do the study entirely again. So these are all statistics related. So in 20, 2 are outliers, it's okay. But if 3 and more are outliers, data is gone, take 20 more. 20 more separately. The data is not useful because there's some problem in the data. Problem in the statistics. Don't take. So first 20, if 2 are outliers, it's okay, no problem. Then where is the external difference range? If it is correct, take it. If it is not correct, 20 more. Again, 2 is only the outliers. If it is comparing with the external difference range, take it. It is not comparing external difference range. Comparing with your first 20 value, this has a normal range and continue. This is what about creation of the normal difference ranges. I think I have a strict adherence to the conditions. Conditions apply clinical correlation. Both two are extremely useful here. Conditions apply clinical correlation. The slides which I have told you, think of normal ranges. SCMR says 50 healthy subjects. It's okay, you can try. This is what I thought was quite useful. Yes. This is what is meant by standard deviation. When you call abnormal, you call abnormal. Either T1 or T2 map values are above or below the two different standard deviation. So if it is above 2 standard deviation, here, for example, 937, 962, less than 980, 2 standard deviation. These 2 is standard deviation here. So 937 to 987 is normal. Beyond that is abnormal. Beyond that, any standard other divisions abnormal on 1.5, on 3 decimal, that is abnormal. This is what curve. This is what is the normalcy and abnormalcy. And for your reference, this is the article of imaging biomarkers. That's the article imaging biomarkers by Higgins et al. This is in 2019 also. And then one review article in Korean Circle of by Vanessa et al. Good article. Let's go through this article. Very useful. So now, after this, I would suggest you go and read 2017 and 2020 consensus statement and update mapping techniques by SMR. Follow all those guidelines. I will not go into much detail now because lack of time. Just to show you, you can draw an ROI more than 20 millimeter square. Means pixels must be more than 20 pixels. So here I have done ROA. Here is about 71 millimeter square, almost coming to about more than 15-20 pixels. And then here, very large ROI. You can draw free ROI. You can draw large ROI depending upon the stress of myocardium available to you. Then circle, we can draw ROIs like this for calculation. Enough. As long as largest segment is available, no problem. Draw ROIs on grayscale images, not on color maps, because avoid the bias artifact drawn grayscale images. I'm not showing the live. Then I told you reference standard deviation is the reference. Now, for reference also I have told you this is an important point. This is a very important point for today's presentation. Normal native T1 and T2 maps. The patient comes to you, then this report you yourself have done and you have reported normal native T1 and T2. Then the inference is no evidence of myocardial diffuse fibrosis or inflammation. Elevated native T1 more than 2 standard deviations. Normal native T2 consistent with diffuse myocardial fibrosis, no significant inflammation. Elevated native T1 more than 2 standard deviations. T2 more than 2 standard deviations consistent with diffuse myocardial fibrosis and inflammation. High native T1 map values more than 5 standard deviation and T2 more than 2 standard deviation. In terms of high active myocardial inflammation or myocardial necrosis, necrotic phase. Reduced T1 less than 2, 2 less than 2. Because of myocardial iron deposition, fatigue. If you don't have ready-made diagnosis for you, ready-made clinical scenario, you can always say that there is a non-specific expansion of the interstitium. This particular myocardium needs further evaluation. Rather than putting as fibrosis, one probably better way of putting is non-specific expansion of interstitium because of IACI fraction and T1 map values. Diffuse specific expansion of interstitium because needs further evaluation. T2 mapping, I will not go into T2 mapping here. It's not an example to show this is stir image, acute infarct. This is the edema, acute infarct and edema showing a value of very high value of T2 map here. 113. Normally, normal T2 map values are 45 to 55, 45 to 50, 45 to 55, 3 Tesla, and 50 to 55 on 1.5. So note this point, 45 to 50 or 55, depending on standard deviation. I would say in my center it's 45 to 50. The other center should be 45 to 55. 3 Tesla on 1.5, 50 to 55 milliseconds. Small range, you can take standard deviation. So here is 113. T2 map is 113. This at my center on 3 Tesla is 45 to 50. It is 113, obviously very high, more than 2 standard deviations. We'll not go into this. Recap. 2 minutes will finish off the recap. What is T1 map mean? Time constant representing the recovery of longitudinal magnetization. That's spin lattice relaxation. Constant representing the recovery of longitudinal relaxation after giving an inversion pulse. That's important. Native T1 in the absence of contrast. T2, time constant representing the decay of transverse magnetization. The recovery of longitudinal magnetization. Here, decay of transverse magnetization. Spin relaxation. To start, time constant representing decay of magnetization in the presence of local inhomogeneities, local field inhomogeneities. That is T2 star. N map. ECV fraction. Extracellular volume fraction calculated by hematocrit, adjustment of hematocrit, subtracting the myocardium to blood pool and post contrast. Synthetic ECV is calculated from, for example, don't have a ready-made ECV value in front of you. The clinician has not performed TPP value at the time of study. Within 24 hours of the study, get a proper hematocrit. Get a synthetic hematocrit. The equation, which is you can go and search in the net. You can get in a lot of articles. Synthetic ECV is calculated by native blood pool value. Native blood pool value in some regression equation. Get synthetic ECV. Then parametric mapping, a process where secondary image is generated, in which each pixel represents specific matrix, T2 or specific maps, T2 star. A derivative such as ECV derived from the spatially corresponding voxel of the magnetic source images. So this is what is meant by mapping, and these are all the what I've told you in this fashion. I've told you mapping. I've told you challenges. Standardization of normal values is very important. I give an example. Follow it. 50 healthy subjects or 20 engine is good. But the external reference value, if it is fitting, go ahead. If it is not fitting, do 20 more. Then compare with external reference value. If it is not fitting, add these 20 plus 20 is your normal range. If it is fitting, automatically reference range and yours are equal. Adopt that particular reference range, normal reference range. Various variation between vendors, sites, and other things, not 100% reproducible. Constraint to anatomy, physiology, local magnetic effect, so many other things. I think these are all you can go and read. What are the positives of T1 mapping technique? T1 mapping, T2 mapping, ECV. Positives are biomarker for diffuse interstitial fibrosis, and fibrosis is the one which is being now a lot of evaluation because of long prodrome. Pick up early and revert it. Just like elastography for fibrosis, F1, F2, F3, F4. Stage will come and probably we can say F1 of myocardium, F2 of myocardium, F3, F4 of myocardium, irreversible stage of myocardium. The stage might come. Wait for the stage to come. So quantify, qualify, accuracy, quantification. The stage might come. The spectrum normal is highly specific, abnormal, totally abnormally specific. In between area is not still too specific. Map values improves the confidence level in diagnosis of non-ischemic cardiomyopathy. Like I told you, first example, I can't give contrast. Whereas my native T1 values, T2 map values are within normal range. Means this fellow doesn't have infiltration or inflammation. That is the confidence with which you can give. You can't give contrast. Non-ischemic cardiomyopathy, people with renal failure. DCAs, that's what I told you. Prognostication, high ECV maps in sarcoidosis, high ECV values in amyloidosis are saying that writing off. Prognostication. They have CD, sudden cardiac death in this hypertrophic cardiomyopathy also. ECV values, high T1 map values, bad prognosis. So that is what it is. Hoping that mapping will come, automatic map generation will come, MRI fingerprinting will come, development of normal reference ranges for wide spectrum, widely acceptable, gender-free, ethnic-free, homogeneity-free, male-female free, septum to water wall free, gastrulate to systole free, temperature free. All these will come, hoping that it will come, and like I told you, it might come, and we can quantify saying this is F1 fibrosis, F2 fibrosis, something like that. And this is what we're looking at. Thank you very much for attention. Sorry for taking long time.
Thank you, sir. Now we will invite Dr. Babu Peter to share his screen. He will explain us about the indications of parametric mapping.
I request everyone to send their queries in the chat box so that we can discuss all the queries at the end.
So is my screen visible?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, IACI and Dr. Nori, President, and Dr. Priya, Secretary, for this opportunity. Over the next 20 to 25 minutes, I'll be showing you some cases. And my job has been made very easy by the detailed explanation given by Dr. Nori. So we have just seen what is parametric mapping, basically T1, T2, T2 star. And the main advantage, as Dr. Nori told us, depicts diffuse involvement where areas without LGE can show abnormal values. There may not be any wrong portrayal of abnormalities, but the main implications, the cost implications, and the special license involved. Again, these are being covered by Dr. Nori. So basically, the normal range has to be estimated, and the T1 values, you remember, are about 25% higher when acquired 3 Tesla compared with 1.5 Tesla MR. And also the native T1 values are about 15% lower when acquired using inversion recovery based shortened Molly sequence compared with the saturation based sequence, which is Sasha. So what are the conditions that increase native T1 and ACV values? Basically, when the extracellular space is expanded, as in myocardial fibrosis, in edema and amyloidosis. And the increased capillary density and vasodilation may also increase the extracellular volume. T1 values are typically decreased in iron, fat, Fabry's disease, and hemorrhage. In T2 mapping, because of the water content, the T2 relaxation time is increased, as in edema, inflammation, or in acute ischemia. So what are the conditions that increase T2 values? Are acute myocardial infarction, myocarditis, cardiomyopathies, and stress cardiomyopathies, sarcoidosis, and cardiac transplant rejections. So these again have been covered by Dr. Nori. So basically, all the cases that I've been going to show you here are being done in a 3 Tesla MRI, magnetron Spira, and an 18-channel body coil was used. And in the sequence parameters was a shortened Molly sequence. So basically, in this, for the native T1 values, where the certain parameters will be changed based on the RR interval, where the vendor is specified. So based on whether it is 700 or below 700, in our system, there is a slight variation in the changes. So in our system, the normal controls for T1 was around 1186 and plus or minus 45.6, and the ECV was around 26.6 plus or minus 3.2. And we had all published this and in a few years back in the Indian Journal of Radiology and Imaging. And these are the various methods of measurement where it can be automated or it can be manually measured in the septum and the anterior wall of the septal wall. And the T2 values in our system are slightly low. It's around 39 plus or minus 2. And again, the ECV calculation covered by Dr. Nori. So the synthetic ECV, there is no hematocrit is not needed, can be estimated from the blood pool. So basically, in the various cases, we are going to see some case of fibrosis. Myocardial fibrosis is the final pathway in various cardiomyopathies. It is associated with various adverse cardiac outcomes, including diastolic and systolic heart failure. There are 3 types of fibrosis. One is the reactive interstitial fibrosis, infiltrative interstitial fibrosis, and a replacement fibrosis. So what are the causes of reactive interstitial fibrosis, which is usually progressive? It can be seen in hypertension, diabetes, idiopathic dilated cardiomyopathy, chronic aortic valve disease, and also in case of remote non-infarcted myocardium. So this was a 19-year-old male presented with breathlessness and pedal edema since childhood. So you can see the dilated left ventricle with the global hyperkinesia which is seen, and this is a case of a dilated cardiomyopathy. It was non-ischemic dilated cardiomyopathy, and the late cadral enhancement was also done, which showed a patchy mid-myocardial septal enhancement. And in the T1 relaxation values, the pre-contrast values were relatively mildly increased, and you can see that the extracellular volume fraction was significantly increased in this patient, which reflects a diffuse fibrosis. So the reactive interstitial fibrosis in dilated cardiomyopathy is quite a prominent feature in disease progression and cardiac remodeling, and sometimes it can elude detection by the late gadolinium enhancement. T1 values and ECVs are higher in segments, even in segments without LG, and can predict the adverse outcomes. So this was another patient who had severe aortic stenosis, and you can see the signal drop in the phase contrast flow velocity imaging, and echo revealed a severe aortic stenosis with calcified aortic valve. The ejection fraction was around 30%, and the parametric mapping was done, and you can see in the T1 values were not significantly increased, and comparatively the ECV fraction was significantly increased in this patient with aortic stenosis. And this is quite significant, and various articles have been published, and it has been found in patients with severe aortic stenosis who have been scheduled for aortic valve intervention. An increased ECV percent reflects left ventricular decompensation, and ECV also detects and quantifies reversible diffuse myocardial fibrosis. It can be associated with multiple markers of left ventricular decompensation, and it's a powerful independent predictor of long-term clinical outcome. So in cases in aortic stenosis, where even the T1 values may not be increased, ECV is a useful predictor of disease outcome. The next is the infiltrative interstitial fibrosis, which is caused due to the deposition in the cardiac interstitium, which can be due to insoluble proteins as in amyloidosis, or due to glycosphingolipids as in Anderson-Fabry disease. So this is a typical case of a cardiac amyloidosis, where you can see bilateral pleural effusions, pericardial effusion is there, and there is intraatrial septal thickening of the valve leaflets are also noted, with thickened left ventricular myocardium, which is noted. And the native T1 values are significantly increased, which is more than 1,350 measured in the septum, and also the inferior and lateral walls. The T2 values were borderline images. So this was an AL type of amyloidosis, and the increased T1 values reflects infiltrative interstitial fibrosis in this patient with the relatively normal T2 values. What is the role of parametric mapping in cardiac amyloid? The T1 mapping tracks cardiac amyloid infiltration, and it is a marker of systolic and diastolic dysfunction and can be used as an early disease marker. This is another patient interesting case where a renal biopsy was done and revealed amyloid. Patient had increased serum creatine and proteinuria, and patient the EF was around 47, referred to a cardiac MR for evaluation. And you can see there is hypertrophy of the left ventricular myocardium, and native T1 alone was done, and which revealed a significantly increased T1 relaxation values involving the myocardium. It was around more than 1,450, and even up to 1,500 in certain regions. T2 values were also relatively increased. So this was a case where in a proven renal amyloidosis, cardiac amyloidosis was picked up. This was without the usage of contrast gadolinium. And the myocardial mapping not only helps to diagnose amyloid in renal failure, but it can pick up the diagnosis early in these. And early recognition and therapy is very important, and especially in these patients. And increased T1 and T2 relaxation values reflects edema, and myocardial edema is an inherent feature of amyloid, and it could be due to the light chain or fibril toxicity, and it is not due to inflammation as in myocarditis. And in an article published in 2018, it was found that significantly increased T2 relaxation values in mapping are more common with untreated amyloid light chain and could be used as a prognostic factor. And how do you differentiate amyloidosis versus left ventricular hypertrophy from other causes? In those with the LVH, amyloidosis has higher T1 values than do hypertension or hypertrophic cardiomyopathy and aortic stenosis. And as we know that transmural late gadolinium enhancement is common in the ATTR type, and whereas the subendocardial LG is more common in the amyloid light chain type where chemotherapy is used. And ECV and T2 is used as a prognostic factor in cardiac amyloid light chain amyloidosis with a 20% relative reduction in survival. And myocardial native T1, T2 values are significantly increased in cardiac amyloidosis, especially in amyloid light chain patients compared to the ATTR patients. T2 values are not predictive of ATTR amyloidosis. So cardiac parametric mapping can be used in the prognostication of amyloidosis and also to differentiate amyloid light chain and ATTR in certain cases. The third type of fibrosis is replacement fibrosis, which is the replacement of the myocytes after cell damage or necrosis. And it can be either localized or diffused. Localized may be in hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, but also in myocarditis, in ischemic cardiomyopathies, and sarcoidosis. Diffuse could be seen in toxic cardiomyopathies or in chronic kidney disease and other inflammatory diseases. So this is a patient with where you can see there's an asymmetric septal hypertrophy, thickening of the intervertebral septum alone. And parametric mapping, which is done, which showed increased T1 relaxation values within the septum, which is around more than 1,350, and T2 values were also increased within the septum. And the increase in T2 values in hypertrophic cardiomyopathy has certain importance, and high T2 values indicate myocardial damage and can predict syncope in patients with asymmetric septal hypertrophy. So mapping in hypertrophic cardiomyopathy may play a role where T1 values are higher in patients even in LV segments without late gadolinium enhancement and can be used to detect areas of tissue disorder beyond those detected by late gadolinium enhancement. So ECV is also increased in patients with typical phenotypes and then asymptomatic positive phenotype relatives. High T2 areas in hypertrophic cardiomyopathy was associated with increase in troponin T levels, and high T2 values correlated with the levels of brain natriuretic peptide and can help in detecting brain myocardial injuries outside the LG areas. And ECV can be used to differentiate hypertrophic cardiomyopathy from another differential diagnosis, which is an athlete's heart. In athlete's heart, the ECV is reduced with increasing left ventricular mass due to the expansion of the cellular component and decreased ECV volume, whereas in hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, the ECV is increased with increasing left ventricular mass due to the extracellular matrix expansion. So this was a patient with myocarditis, a 40-year-old male who had presented with cardiac failure after traveling abroad. This was about 3 to 4 years back, and you can see there was severe left ventricular dysfunction with hyperkinesia is noted, and features of non-ischemic cardiomyopathy was given, and there was a patchy mid-myocardial hyperenhancement involving the septum, just seen here, and patient was diagnosed as acute myocarditis due to viral etiology, and the native T1 mapping revealed increased T1 relaxation values, which is around more than 1,400, 1,350 in the myocardium. T2 values were also relatively increased. In myocarditis, T1 mapping has been used to determine the extent of acute myocarditis and is now said to have greater sensitivity than the Lake-Lewis criteria. Native T1 is more accurate than the T2 weighted values as well. And in certain articles, it has been proposed that the cutoff values more than 5 standard deviations can be used to diagnose acute myocarditis and more than 2 standard deviations for the convalescent phase of myocarditis. This was a patient who had intrauterine death 20 days back. Patient presented with complaints of swelling of bilateral lower limbs for about 10 days. Echo revealed global hyperkinesia, and again in MR you can see left ventricle appears dilated. There is a global hyperkinesia of the left ventricle. E was significantly reduced, was about 32.6%, and endosteric volume was also increased, and this was a peripartum cardiomyopathy patient. Parametric mapping was done, and which revealed a significantly increased T1 maps values, were more than 1,400, 1,500 in some areas. ECV was also increased, and the T2 values were also increased in our system. Interestingly, and the late gadolinium enhancement did not reveal any evidence of myocardial scar or fibrosis, looked apparently normal. And we can see how parametric mapping makes a difference in these patients, that shows evidence of fibrosis, where even no evidence of LG is noted. And various articles again have been published where shows peripartum cardiomyopathy patients have higher native T1, ECV, and T2 values, and extracellular volume fraction can independently predict left ventricular function recovery in these patients. And this is a patient with a restrictive cardiomyopathy, endomyocardial fibrosis with thickening of the right ventricular apex with a large filling defect involving the right atrium, which is a thrombus. And parametric mapping with T1 revealed increased T1 relaxation values involving the myocardium with relatively preserved T2 relaxation values. This was another patient presenting with dyspnea and chest pain and referred as non-ischemic cardiomyopathy. Again, relatively dilated left ventricle with the global hyperkinesia is noted. And T1 relaxation values revealed relatively increased T1 relaxation values within the septum, and the ECV values were significantly increased in this patient. Late girdle enhancement revealed patchy mid-myocardial enhancement involving predominantly the septum, and this was a patient with sarcoidosis. What is the role of parametric mapping in ischemic cardiomyopathy? And usually the T1 and T2 mapping can provide prognostic information by identifying the infarct core and also the intramyocardial hemorrhage, and both of which may be associated with an adverse prognosis. Post-contrast T1 and ECV changes can be identified in remote myocardium, even early in the course of acute infarction. An adverse cardiac remodeling can begin at the time of infarction, and it is not due to long-term hemodynamic stress. And T2 mapping can be used as a biomarker to herald the resolution of myocardial edema. T2 star mapping can be used as intramyocardial hemorrhage and reperfusion injury post-infarction. And this was a case of ischemic dilated cardiomyopathy, where in contrast to other cases that we see there is a systolic wall thinning of the myocardium and significant predominantly non-viable myocardium with almost transmural hyperenhancement is noted involving the septum with areas of microvascular obstruction. And the parametric mapping showed significantly increased T1 relaxation values. You can note the significantly altered color change involving the myocardium corresponding to the areas of infarct. And this was a case of ischemic dilated cardiomyopathy, where T1 mapping can be used to assess edema and also the viability of the infarct size. And in this patient, actually, the remote myocardium did not reveal increased T1 relaxation values. And this is another patient where you can see there is an apical thrombus with transmural hyperenhancement involving the mid cavity and the apex, where the T2 values were relatively increased, which reflected acute myocardial infarction. So the native T1 mapping can be used to detect both acute and chronic myocardial infarction, where the T1 mapping is correlated significantly with transmural extent of the myocardial infarction and can be used to differentiate normal, viable, and non-viable myocardium with quite distinctive T1 profiles. In chronic myocardial infarction, the T1 values are high, but it's lower and less extensive compared to the acute myocardial infarction. The ECV, however, is significantly increased, more than 51 compared to normal myocardium, but it is lower than in acutely infarcted myocardium. And the only pitfall is that the presence of intracardial myocardial fat in scar tissue can distort the T1 estimates. And fat has low T1 values, and the fatty replacement within the infarct core can show the noticeable T1 decreases. Having seen the various types of fibrosis and few examples showing examples denoting them, we'll just finally we'll see some miscellaneous applications of parametric mapping. And we know after the COVID, we have seen several cases of COVID-related cardiomyopathies. This patient presented had COVID in 21, following which he developed chest pain. Echo revealed reduced ejection fraction, and again there is a relative hyperkinesia noted in the left ventricle, and the late gadolinium enhancement did not reveal a significant late gadolinium enhancement. The ejection fraction was decreased, and the native parametric mapping revealed increased T1 relaxation values in the septum as well as the ECV values, which reflects residual diffuse myocardial damage and fibrosis in a post-COVID recovery patient. The T2 values were not significantly increased. And in COVID, the possible causes which has been postulated may be due to inflammatory cardiomyopathy or a chronic active lymphocytic myocarditis, where sometimes the only my maps could be abnormal. And in this article, which has been published reflecting on the outcomes of cardiovascular magnetic resonance in patients recovered from coronavirus disease, increased T1 measures reflects diffuse myocardial fibrosis or edema, whereas T2 is specific for edema. Patients with increased T1 and T2 have an active inflammatory process, while those with increased T1 and normal T2 reflects healing with some residual diffuse myocardial damage. In myocardial ion overload, T2 star mapping is the first parametric mapping technique which is used as a clinical tool in 1.5 Tesla MR. Remember that T2 star is not used in a 3 Tesla MR, and myocardial T1 mapping, however, has potential for improved reduction of mild ion loading, and may has been found to be more sensitive. And it has a potential role in 3 Tesla MR where T2 star is not used. ECV is significantly increased in thalassemia major and can be associated with myocardial ion overload. So this is a patient with thalassemia major and chronic blood transfusion, came for myocardial ion quantification, and the T1 and T2 mapping revealed decreased T1 and T2 values. T2 values, you can see it's around 28 to from 30, where T1 again in our system compared it is significantly low. And the T2 star was actually done in a 1.5 Tesla Avanto, which revealed a borderline T2 star around 20.3. And T2 mapping has been used to assess ion overload cardiomyopathy. T2 mapping has some potential advantages over T2 star in that the pulse sequences to determine T2 are less sensitive to static magnetic field homogeneities and can produce images of high SNR. The last case is this is a case of mediastinal lymphoma on chemotherapy, and the adrenomycin patient developed breathlessness, and patient was referred for cardiac MR. EF was significantly decreased. There is relative hyperkinesia of the left ventricle, and late gadolinium enhancement images did not reveal significant late gadolinium enhancement reflecting a scar or fibrosis. And the T1 relaxation values revealed relatively increased T1 relaxation values and increased ECV values, reflecting a fibrosis in this post-chemotherapy patient. And this picture is seen in the various articles. And to sum up, T1 values are significantly increased in acute myocardial infarction, amyloid light chain amyloidosis followed by ATTR amyloidosis, then chronic MI. It is also increased in other causes like in hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, dilated cardiomyopathy. Decreased values are seen in fat-rich iron and due to fat. So to summarize mapping in a nutshell, the T1 mapping and T2 mapping can be used for tissue characterization, where if both are normal, the myocardium is normal. In fibrosis, T1 values are increased. In edema, both the T1 and T2 values are increased. When both are very much increased, significantly increased, it reflects acute cell death as in myocardial infarction. So the parametric mapping has both a descriptive role and a prescriptive role. It reflects the presence of disease, but also provides prognostic information and risk stratification in patients with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy or an amyloidosis for staging and disease activity. It also has a role in treatment response. T1 mapping is more sensitive than late gadolinium enhancement to detect diffuse myocardial fibrosis. T1 mapping is feasible even in patients with severe renal impairment, which is a great advantage, as I showed you in a case of a renal amyloidosis. ECV reflects myocardial tissue remodeling. And depending on the center and the vendor, the ECV T1, T2 values are changing. T2 maps are primarily used for myocardial edema. T1 and T2 mapping can be used to detect low ion in 3 Tesla MR. And the parametric mapping is now incorporated for myocardial detection and follow-up. T1 and T2 mapping can be easily incorporated into existing cardiac MR protocols and can identify diffuse or early myocardial pathologies, and very useful in patients with renal failure. And it can be used as a potential biomarker to prognosticate and follow up various diffuse myocardial diseases like myocarditis or various cardiomyopathies. And these are some very good reference articles which you can go through. Thank you all for your kind attention.
Thank you, Dr. Babu. It's a wonderful presentation. I think to sum up what we have discussed so far, a few things I want to highlight. one, when you are looking at the so-called myomap, especially the T1 T2 map, and people, when they are, those beginners usually get confused with the T1 image, what we are looking at, normal Spinnaco T1 image, where say fat will appear bright, whereas water will appear dark on T1 image. Whereas when we are talking about T1 mapping, suddenly we are saying that the fat and the iron will appear darker, whereas the fibrosis and the edema will appear brighter. But the basic difference, what you have to understand is the so-called Spinnaco T1 image, what we call it as, it's called T1 weighted image. Okay, so and the final image produced is based on the T1 value of the tissues, which are now how fast they are recovering. Okay, so shorter the T1 value, they will recover faster, so that they will have more magnetization, then we'll have a better signal. Okay, so that is, we are not directly measuring the T1 value in a T1 weighted image. So that's why it is called a T1 weighted image. So those tissues which is appearing brighter on T1 weighted image basically will have a shorter T1 value, whereas those tissues which are appearing darker on T1 weighted image will have a relatively longer T1 value. So that's what we are in the absolute quantification, we are measuring it in a T1 map. So that's a very important basic concept people has to understand. So in summary, basically those tissues which is appearing brighter on T1 weighted image, like a fat or the blood, say methemoglobin, so they will have a lower T1 value, whereas those we are having a higher increase in the water content, like an edema, they are going to appear brighter because of the increased T1 value on a T1 map. Okay, so that is a very important thing. And as we discussed earlier, so many people will be confused about the normal values. So most of the normal values are the reference ranges given in the articles and the text. And regarding the getting a normal values for the getting the volunteers in some of the busy centers, it is not possible to scan 50 volunteers. That's what recommended by SCMR. I don't think it is practically possible in Indian setup. So what in our center, what we did is we are doing this cardiac MRI for last 10 years. And so when we started this myomap, we didn't go directly started reporting this myomap. So we were doing this myomap for all cases for nearly 1 month. And we are looking at the cases where we can able to see clearly a normal myocardium versus the abnormal myocardium, looking at all the parameters and all. So we were just to keep collecting the values, and then arbitrarily we have decided this is the normal and this is the abnormal, and now we couldn't able to do 50 normal volunteers and all, which is not possible in a busy setup. So that is not the recommended thing, not to directly doing on the patients. And but the important thing is, we know that at least 30 to 40% of cardiac MRI cases are normal. So now you can take that as a normal value, and as you do more and more cases, then you'll know what is the variations between normal and abnormal. And if you look at the numbers as such, see, when you say 1,000 we are using a 3T Siemens system, and where we have a normal range as 1,150 to 1,250 as a normal value, and that doesn't mean that 1,251 is abnormal and 1,249 is normal. So when we are talking about numbers anywhere, when we are talking about numbers, say even if you take a BP, when you say 120/80 is normal, that doesn't mean 119 is always normal, 121 is always abnormal. So similarly in the MyMap also, now we have to look the numbers in a continuum. Okay, so higher the number, more likely to be abnormal. If it is just mildly above the normal range, that doesn't mean it is always abnormal. That is a very important thing. And we have to keep in mind when you are interpreting the MyMap. And even though if you look at the uses of MyMap, it is almost used in every cardiac MRI, almost every diseases. But personally, I feel at least 4 areas, main areas where MyMap will have a very major role. The first and foremost important uses of MyMap is the T2 star map in iron overload. Absolutely no doubt about that. It's clearly proven, and it is not only used to diagnose iron overload, it is also useful to monitor the therapy. Suppose if you diagnose iron overload and if we start chelating therapy, there are no other way we can say that whether patient has become improved or not. You cannot assess the wall thickness or the LV function, all those things, but we can use the T2 star mapping for follow-up of cases, and we can also assess whether patient is developing again after chemotherapy, after chelation therapy, the patient become normal, and to know whether patient again is developing the new disease. It is definitely useful. So T2 star map is there are a lot of literature. And the only thing is, so far it's only 1.5 Tesla is approved for T2 star mapping, so we can use that. Then other area where the MyMap is very useful is in amyloid. So in amyloidosis, we'll have a very sky high values of T1 mapping under the ECV. Now, which is usually not seen in other conditions like a dilated cardiomyopathy or even a hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. So, like in our 3T, it will be something like 1,400, 1,500 in that range. Similarly, ECV can go up to 60, 70s and all, which are very, very unusual with the other conditions. Then the third important area which we find very useful is in Fabry's disease, because most of the cardiac pathologies you will have elevated T1 value, whereas in Fabry's disease it is classically will have a low T1 value. Of course, iron overload, it will appear really very dark myocardium on even in localizer sequences or in your cine sequence you will identify. So that is different. But in the cases of LVH, if you see a very low T1 value, you will strongly suspect Fabry's disease. And remember, if you can diagnose it early, it is it's treatable. Enzyme replacement therapies are available, and it is may not be completely curable, but lot of these patients are treatable. So if you diagnose at a very late stage, then no point. But using this MyMap, you can diagnose it early. And the fourth very important area where we found very useful is the myocarditis. So especially to identify an active disease, and if you do a stir image, you can identify the edema, but always you'll have a confusion whether that subtle brightness, is it an artifact or is it the blood pool which is appearing brighter. Whereas in a T2 mapping, you have a clear-cut value and will be very confident in saying that the T1 value and the T2 values are really increased. So these four areas I can strongly suggest where you can make a positive diagnosis of a particular disease. Also, we can use it in other way, like to exclude a disease. Suppose they are referred as a case of, or a suspected case of amyloidosis, systemic amyloid, to rule out a cardiac amyloid. And even if you are doing the all other things are normal, you still won't be able to say confidently rule out a amyloid. Whereas if you can do a T1 map and the ECV, if it is absolutely normal, we can say that at this point in time, patient doesn't have any significant amyloidosis, that we can confidently rule out that. Similarly, patients with the LV hypertrophy, and if you have a doubt between HCM or the amyloid versus infiltrative disease versus the routine hypertensive disease or an athletes, a normal T1 value will strongly exclude both HCM or the especially amyloid. which will be more favoring a hypertensive heart disease or an athletes, especially, you don't see an elevated T1 value. So you can use these values in an appropriate clinical setting to make use of it better in the day-to-day practice. So there are a couple of questions. One is whether the T2 star mapping can be used only in 1.5. Yes, definitely. So far in 3T, there is no normal values has been recommended. Instead, people are trying a T1 mapping. So that is coming in a big way. Coming to the other important question is regarding the gadolinium in the calculation of type of contrast, what you are using it to calculate ECV. See, the important thing is the post contrast T1 value, you generally don't use a single value as such. We usually use the post contrast T1 value in the calculation of ECV. So there both the blood pool value as well as the myocardial T1 values are taken into consideration. So both will get null. So whether whatever type of contrast media you are using, it is fine. You can calculate the ECV value. Only thing is you have to wait for at least 10 minutes so that it is better to take it at the equilibrium phase where there is a good amount of contrast nicely leaked into the extracellular space, where the contrast the concentration is equilibrium is obtained. So we have to wait for at least 10 minutes because most of the time we will be doing the studies, the LGEs start only after 5 minutes. So after completing the LGE, all the sequences or all the PCs, then you can do 10 to 15 minutes. After 10 to 15 minutes is the ideal time to do a ECV value. And regarding the difference between SASA and MOLI, I don't have much idea. So if anyone else knows the differences, why MOLI is more commonly used than the SASA, let us know. Yes, Dr. Priya, do you want to add anything more?
Anyone is using Sasha among the panelists, please? Among the panelists, anyone is using Sasha?
No, I don't use.
No, it's Siemens machine has MOLI. I think G had Sasha, but
G also is MOLI. I'm using MOLI. Vimal?
We use MOLI, sir.
Acha, Pudivan is speaking. Okay. So Sasha, I don't know. I mean, Pooja Sinha is our pediatric cardiologist who has done her training in Toronto, and she's interested in CMR, pediatric CMR. She asked that question specifically. So Sasha, yes, Sasha, we don't have any experience with Sasha.
I think a lot of literature nowadays coming on the Maya map. It is not like something like MR spectroscopy where initially there was so much of hype and then its use is significantly reduced. But compared to that, T1 and the T2 mapping and the ECV are really clinically useful, and we are routinely using it. In all cases, we always take, except in the cases where it is just coming for a viability, where we may not do the Maya map. Otherwise, for all cardiomyopathies, Maya map is included as a part of the routine protocol. Which usually we used to take at least 3 SAT axis and 1 long axis. Generally, even 2 SAT axis may be sufficient, like a basal and the mid SAT axis, because apical SAT axis will have more artifact. So that is better. You can do it with the 4-chamber view. If you have any doubt in the calculating the T1 map at the apical level, better to do a long axis than using a SAT axis, because on a SAT axis view, very difficult to get a true cross section of the all the aspect of the apical chambers. So it is recommended to do a long axis. So if possible, do even 3 slices enough, 2 SAT axis and 1 long axis, either 4-chamber or a 2-chamber.
Rajesh and Babu sir and Pudivan also. The clarification is suppose there is mismatch in the native and post contrast maps, and you are unable to combine both of them, then is there any alternative way of measuring the ECV? That is the query.
I don't have any specific answer.
Sir, you mean about some breathing artifacts which would have moved, something
Yes,
like
yes,
that?
Yes.
Yeah. Sir, at least even if one slice, probably if we get, which should be, matching, for example, mid cavity or something, I think we can still get an approximate value, though the results will not be accurate, but
Okay, so that was the query. So that means it is imperative that both the native and post contrast maps should match.
Yes,
and have to be
yes.
coincided to get an ECV map.
Yes, that is important. Yeah, we have to have a same images, same slice. Say, suppose we are taking a mid sat axis, both the pre and post contrast, we have to take it at the same level.
Yes.
Some faculty has raised his hand. Whether want to ask something?
Yeah, good evening, sir. I'm Sajan. I am working in GE, working as a summer application specialist. Yeah.
Welcome, Sajan.
Sorry to interrupt. So, the saturation recovery based T1 mapping sequence in GE it is available. It's called Smart T1, Smart T1 map. So, but we do recommend T1 Molly because most of all the articles are globally available in Molly sequence. But in GE we have the Smart T1. We set up the protocol. Pardon?
I can start using it tomorrow?
Yes, of course, sir. I set up the protocol already.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
So that means the GE equipment, what I have now, it's a news to me that I can do Molly and both.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much.
You're welcome, sir.
sir, there is another question about T1 mapping for microvascular ischemia in chronic diabetic patients. Is there any role? I think microvascular ischemia, it will be like more calculating MPRI value and stress perfusion study.
Exactly.
Parametric mapping will not have any added role over there.
You mentioned that edema, fibrosis, and inflammation. This is what we are looking at. We are not looking at perfusion. So ultimately, if chronic ischemia has led to fibrosis, that can be picked up, but not the ischemia per se.
I think there have been some studies which has compared the native T1 values of the myocardium at rest and during stress. And they have postulated that areas of ischemia during stress, there will be no significant change in the T1 values, whereas normal areas which will have some amount of vasodilatation and increase in perfusion will have a slight drop in T1 values. But I don't think it has been standardized yet, but there have been some articles on that.
Actually, one section is there purely on stress T1 mapping.
Yeah. There are a lot of articles on, instead of giving contrast, so just to do a stress and look at the T1 value. Correct. So if there is the contrast is contraindicated, and if you want to do the stress study, so you can do the adenosine stress, and instead of giving contrast to perfusion, you can look at the T1 value both during stress and the rest. So that type of studies are available. So the results are almost equal to the contrast to perfusion.
So I think we have come to nearly an end. We have completed all the questions which were sent in the Google form as well as in the chat box. And I really thank all the faculties, Dr. Noori, Dr. Babu Peter, and Dr. Rajesh Kannan, and all other EC members who have shared their inputs. I will close the meeting. The recording will be available on the website. Thank you, everyone, and good night.